We've got 40 odd questions here. Try and grab Jelena during the course of the day if we don't get to things. Also, this is the start of a conversation about this work. We're still reflecting on it. We want to have conversations with you in the coming weeks and months to start to dig into what this might all mean. So jump into the questions, and the first question from Dean, which is quite popular, is a really, really important one that I'll get Jelena to reflect on. I think in any effort to identify shared experience, you do really worry about people who don't fall into what we might see as some sort of mainstream or common life journey. I think we got a sense, Jelena, of people that you spoke to that face particular challenges came from different backgrounds. But can you just give a sense of how difference is dealt with in this research and what that might mean?
So we, thank you, it's a very good question. We intentionally recruited participants to make sure that we're able to cover differences as well. So throughout what we did find and what is on the map, and perhaps when you do get a bigger version of it for your files, you can have a look that whilst we looked for that common block white line where most of our consumers are in their life journey, we also did an alternative life path. So we heard the consumers that might have not chosen a traditional life path. And then we had many disruptors. So what we were discovering, maybe like I said, is that early in the presentation that we found more in common than in difference, but we certainly have heard the differences. We've highlighted two, Johan and Jennifer today, two of our households that have needed to completely change how they go about living their life. We've got ample more where we know that they are made to think differently. They might not be on that common path, but we know how these consumers that are perhaps not on that common path are thinking about their lives, how they need to be changing it, and how that's influencing perhaps how they go about energy and energy bills.
Brilliant, thanks, Jelena. And I should just say the slides and the full reports will be circulated to everyone today. We've also got a handout booklet that you'll be getting shortly after Jelena finishes. We just didn't want you sort of choosing your own adventure too early. The next question is from, I'm assuming that might be Craig Memory. Are you the CM in the room? But it really goes to, I guess, linking what we heard from Jeff on people's interest in peer-to-peer, the extent to which people might be thinking about peer-to-peer because I might not trust my service provider. I think the point in that question is peer-to-peer relies on us trusting each other. To what extent did that conversation, particularly in the groups, did you get a sense of how people were thinking about their neighbours, other consumers and the community at large? That trust issue, how did it come through?
Yeah, I think certainly the consumers are not trusting those parties that should be changing something, how they go about using energy. I feel peer-to-peer's probably more advanced in the UK than it would be here, but we did hear some of our consumers talk about it in some of the sessions. So I think there is a similar line of thought, is that they would trust other households and neighbours, but we here need something more. We need to clarify. From Dr. Hardy's presentation, there is a vision up here that we're all following as households. For us, our consumers are saying, we don't quite have that up there. We don't know where and what does peer-to-peer mean in all of our existence. I think they need it's sort of almost basics first before we get to peer-to-peer conversations. I felt like that was too advanced.
Brilliant, thanks, Jelena. We've got a question from Twee, who I've seen here before, who's in the middle there. Great question. I guess it really goes to the dark future map and that anxiety there. We've also got issues around, or questions around the extent to which people are engaged now and trust. And I guess the question goes to how do we fix that? And your tips, Jelena, about how to fix that. And I guess to some extent that's our job, to figure out how to respond to what's come through the research. But what interests me about this question is your methodology, which starts the conversations with people's lives, somehow makes people more comfortable and trusting then to start to speculate about the future. I wonder if you could, I guess, respond to the question, but also the beauty of your methodology and a little more detail about how the conversation unplays.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thank you for the question. I think it's interesting. I think the sector's almost starting to do that, to start to restore that trust by actually visualising and understanding the consumer and their starting point in the energy conversation. I think our methodology was really intentional in that sense because we didn't want to start the conversation with energy because and I felt like we would lose a lot of the households and consumers out of that. But we really said, tell me about you, map it out for me. What are you going through? What does that mean? What bothers you? What keeps you awake at night? What about here? What about there? Well, what have you learned? Like we had a conversation of at least about 20, 25 minutes just about them. And that is quite an amazing way to quickly build trust that we want to hear about them and their lives. Then we started talking about energy. Well, how does it fit within what you're telling me? But you told me this, and now you're telling me something else. So I think it's a good first step to start to restore trust by just seeing what consumers are going through and what they're telling us about their lives, which is confusing, convoluted, busy. They don't have any time, yet they go to work some of these things out on a daily basis in their lives so they can pay the bills and they can take care of households and work and everything at the same time. So I think starting with them is a good first step to...
And just to build on that, one of the groups I went to, people sort of file into a room. They might have done a group like that before. People are quite like careful and withdrawn almost initially. By the end of the conversations, particularly when we got to this piece about the future, you could not get them to leave the room.
We know we succeeded when that happens as moderators.
That was a fairly consistent experience, Jelena.
So
there was something about this conversation in particular that people found interesting.
I think we know when consumers do want to hang around after group conversations, we know the moderators have done a good job in it, and otherwise they all just get their notes and run away. But this was really interesting that they hung around and they wanted to have a chat even afterwards. So
that's great. I might go to the third one on the list there. There's potentially a contradiction here between people wanting simplicity and the message about managing use and technology. Just maybe a little bit more about how people felt about technology, I guess their current experience and potentially what they were after and in the future. I know we heard people that were doing all sorts of things now because they didn't have information and tools. We heard one story about a consumer who was switching their microwave off to try and save standby power. Knew it really wasn't going to make a difference, but it sort of gave them some sense of agency.
I think technology, at the risk of repeating myself, I think was one of the green buckets, if you like, when consumers were importing themselves into the future and everything else, you know, population and density and how we go about being and living was all a bit red. So consumers were quite open to technology and having that as a facilitator of helping them manage some of the bills. That's what we heard.
Excellent. And we might have two more questions. So Dean's asked a really good question, which goes to one of the general characterisations of that younger group. I think it's leaving the nest is they do have more time, potentially some more freedom, but at the same time coming through, particularly that in that age group, is quite an anxiety about the future, and particularly in and around climate. How do those two things fit together?
I'm not sure if we detected anxiety so much in our work as we did the awareness of what's happening around them, simply due to quite an easy access to information. I think they obviously think more about the climate, think more about the environment than other life stages, households and consumers. But I think they were more wondering about what does it mean in terms of how should I be changing myself rather than anxiousness.
Am I right as well that the longer audio clip you played at the start of the presentation was somebody in that age group? I think I am. And it was interesting that there was that awareness there and that concern, but then there was a barrier to thinking, well, what can I do?
31, maybe early.
Yeah, early.
Adult.
So,
yeah.
But that's definitely something that we should think about much
more.
With that, and I'm looking at Angela, we might draw a line under it there, but that's certainly not the end of the conversation. Can we, I'll thank Jelena again. Thank you for the great questions.
Thank you, everyone.
And Rachel and the team for handing everything up.